Do you almost always mistrust others? Is your outlook on people and life negative and black and white? Are you usually cynical and mainly just care about yourself? In this video, I break down a conversation of Andrew Huberman and Jamil Zaki, where they talk about insecure attachment, how it can lead to cynicism, and all the negative effects that this can have on your life. And spoiler, being cynic and mistrusting can negatively affect your life to a very, very huge degree. At the end, I will also go into what you can do about it. But now let's jump into the first clip.
One early experience and one early phenotype that's very strongly correlated with generalized mistrust, an unwillingness to count on other people, would be insecure attachment early in life.
So yes, insecure attachment leads to mistrust. But where does insecure attachment come from? Well, usually it comes from having an unstable relationship with your primary caregivers, so usually your parents. Early in life, you learn that people are not secure, but rather unstable, and you cannot count on them or what they are doing. This next clip illustrates this quite well.
And researchers found that insecurely attached kids, when they saw a video of a reunion of a caregiver and infant acting in a way that felt loving and stable, they looked longer, as though that was surprising. Kids who were securely attached didn't look very long at those stable interactions, but looked longer at interactions that were unstable.
Interesting.
It's almost as though there's a setup that kids develop very early. Can I count on people? Am I safe with people? And insecure attachment is a signal coming early in life, no, you're not safe with people, that I think, well, and the data show, elaborates later in life into mistrust in other relationships.
And why is that? Well, probably it is because your brain, from the moment you are born, tries to figure out what is the world and how can I be safe in the world. And when you're then confronted with unstable relationships or your parents are maybe even toxic, your brain creates a safety lesson that you have to watch out for yourself and that you cannot rely on others. You have to be there for yourself always. So at the core, your brain has your best interest at heart to keep you safe. Even though later in life, this does not serve you anymore and is bad for you. But your brain has the safety lesson ingrained, and there's not a good mechanism that your brain can let go of this deeply ingrained safety lesson from earliest childhood. So that's important if we want to understand what you can do about this. And again, we'll get into that at the end of this video, but for now, let's dive deeper into cynicism with this next clip here.
That cynics are not embracing the complexity of disagreement. They are moving away from the certainly any notion of excitement by complexity. It seems like it's a heuristic. It's a way to simplify the world around you.
That's exactly right. Phil Tetlock has a great term for this called integrative complexity. To what extent can you hold different versions of the world, different arguments in mind? To what extent can you pick from each one what you believe based on the best evidence available, right? And integrative complexity is a great way to learn about the world and about the social world, whereas cynicism, as you rightly point out, is much more of a heuristic. It's a black and white form of thinking. And the really sad thing is that cynicism then puts us in a position where we can't learn very much.
Cynics have the assumption that they cannot trust anyone, so they don't. And this also prevents them from learning more. If you never take a risk and trust someone, you can also never learn if you could have trusted that person. And of course, the world, and especially social relationships, are not just black and white, like cynics usually see it. Just as Jamil explains here.
A wicked learning environment is where your priors prevent you from gathering the information that you would need to confirm or disconfirm them. So think about mistrust, for instance, right? It's easy to understand why people mistrust. You know, some of us are insecurely attached and we've been hurt in the past. We're trying to stay safe. We don't want to be betrayed. This is a completely natural response. It's a totally understandable response. But when we decide to mistrust, we never are able to learn whether the people who we are mistrusting would have been trustworthy or not. When we trust, we can learn whether we've been right or not.
And this mistrust does not even serve cynical people well. As we just established, mistrusting others right from the start prevents them from learning. Turns out because of that, cynics do less well in detecting liars or knowing when someone lies to them, because they have no experience. They just mistrust right from the start, just as Jamil explains here.
That actually cynics do less well than non-cynics in detecting liars. Because if you have a blanket assumption about people, you're not actually attending to evidence in a sharp way. You're not actually taking in new information and making wise decisions.
And all of this can actually have detrimental effects on your life. Let's get into some aspects with this next study here.
There's one really classic and very sad study where people were forced to give an extemporaneous speech about a subject they don't know much about, a very stressful experience that raised people's blood pressure. Some of these folks had a cheerleader, not an actual cheerleader, but a friendly stranger who was with them while they prepared, saying, "You've got this. I know you can do it. I'm in your corner." Other people had no support. As you know, one of the great things about social support is that it buffers us from stress. So most people, when they had this friendly person by their side, their blood pressure as they prepared for the speech went up only half as much as when they were alone. But cynical people had a spike in their blood pressure that was indistinguishable in magnitude, whether or not a person was by their side or not.
And to me, this is fascinating in a very, very sad way. The insecure attachment that you adopted because of the unstable relationship with your parents that maybe have been toxic causes you to develop cynicism and not trust people at all, even if they show you obviously, hey, I am on your side with all that I got. Even if it's just in that brief moment where you have a presentation. Hey, right now I'm 100% for sure on your side. I'm here and I'm cheering for you. But cynics cannot even trust that, and it doesn't get to them in a positive way at all. But it gets even worse than that. Cynical people also bring out the worst in others.
A second thing that happens when you choose to pretend that others are selfish, greedy, and dishonest is that you bring out the worst in them. There's a lot of research that finds that cynical people tend to do things like monitoring others, spying on them, or threatening them to make sure that that other person doesn't betray them. But of course, other people can tell how we're treating them, and they reciprocate our kindness and retaliate against our unkindness. So cynical people end up bringing out the most selfish qualities of others, telling a story full of villains and then ending up stuck living in that story.
Turns out if you mistrust others and behave badly towards them, they do the same to you. It basically becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, if you're very cynical, please do not feel attacked right now. It's very important to understand these things, so you know what you can do about it. Jamil also talks about many studies that show how people basically underestimate how good and trustworthy others are. So other people are generally much more trustworthy and much better than we would assume. And that's something we all should be aware of and can work on. But if you want to dive deeper into that, the link to the interview is in the description down below. Let's go back to cynics and let's listen to this next clip that describes how cynical people across the board have worse outcomes in life.
First, and this one is pretty straightforward, the effect of cynicism on well-being is just really documented and quite negative. So there are large prospective studies with tens of thousands of people, several of these studies, that measure cynicism and then measure life outcomes in the years and decades afterwards. And the news is pretty bleak for cynics, right? So absolutely lower levels of happiness, flourishing, satisfaction with life, greater incidence of depression, greater loneliness. But, it's not just the neck up that cynicism affects. Cynics over the course of their lives also tend to have greater degrees of cellular inflammation, more incidence of heart disease, and they even have higher rates of all-cause mortality, so shorter lives than non-cynics.
So this should ring all of your alarm bells. Cynical people don't just generally do worse in life, but they also struggle much more with mental health or physical problems. What can you now do about it? Well, being aware of it and making a conscious effort to change this in your life is a very good first step. But it gets even better if you combine that with going deeper to the actual root cause of the issues and dealing with them there. As we established, this detrimental outlook on life develops in early childhood. So let's say this is you as a small child. Back then you were still happy, now you're cynical. No, I'm just joking. But yeah, you had a situation, you experienced a situation that made you a little bit more cynical, represented by that box. And then as you go through life, it just builds on top of each other. You have unstable relationships with your parents are unstable people, and you just experience more and more that you cannot trust people. And it just continues to develop and stack on top of each other. Now, this is how I work with my clients. I basically, and this is not just for cynicism, but for any mental issue or other issues that they struggle with, we try to go, or in most cases we do, sometimes we only try, but then we need to do other methods. But anyway, we try to go back to the very first situation, to the root cause when all of this started. So this is called an ISE, initial sensitizing event. And this is maybe the first time that you experienced, oh, I cannot trust my mother, she's unstable, she's not there for me, she's unhealthy. This ingrained very, very deep in your subconscious, and you carry it around with you throughout your life, and it tells you, hey, you cannot trust people because of that. That's a safety lesson that you experienced. Now we go back to this exact memory, and this maybe have been when you were 1 year old or 2 years old. Of course, you usually don't have a conscious memory of that, but your subconscious always knows. So we go into your subconscious, we bring up this memory again, and then we, very simple terms, just watch this memory. We watch it a couple of times, and with every time you watch it, you feel all the attached negative emotions that are attached to that memory. And like that, you can process the memory and let it go, which often then leads to a ripple effect, and all the memories that have been built on top of each other resolve themselves. Doesn't have to happen, but sometimes it happens, and this is basically how you can heal these issues right at the core. And this also makes it much easier for you to then behave differently or think differently about other people and be less cynical and more trusting. If you want to dive really deep into that and learn how childhood wounds and trauma can affect your life, and of course what you really can do about it in a much more in-depth way than I just explained, be sure to watch the video right over there.